It's Tuesday, May 13th, 2025. Welcome to Make It Make Sense. I'm Granthermes. Today on the show, drugs and deals. The Trump administration cuts a deal with China on tariffs, sort of, and Trump signs an executive order on prescription drug prices, but no one is really sure how it's going to work. And before we get going, a reminder to make sure that you're following and subscribe to the podcast on whatever app you listen to this on and on YouTube, and that you're subscribed to the Make It Make Sense Substack for brand new articles all week long. It's just $5 a month. Okay, let's get to the show. Over the weekend, Trump signed another executive order. This time, he was giving pharmaceutical companies 30 days to lower their prices to an undetermined price while negotiating that with Secretary of Health Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Dr. Mehmet Oz, yes, that Dr. Oz, who is now the head of the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services. Essentially, what Trump wants is drug prices to be lowered to what's called most favored nation status. It's a term used in global trade talks and poli-sci, and definitely not one Trump came up with himself. I'm not entirely sure he fully understands it. But what it means is that he wants Americans to pay the same as the lowest priced country. And I know that's a little confusing, so let me explain here. Drug makers work with other countries to be able to sell their products in those countries at certain price points. A lot of countries do that negotiating directly, meaning their governments negotiate for them because they have nationalized health systems. In the U.S., we don't have that. And because of that, those other countries have gotten lower prices. And that also means that U.S. customers then, to a certain degree, are helping to prop up the pharmaceutical industry. And we have some numbers to back that up. In 2022, the National Institutes of Health took a look at these numbers and found that Americans pay 4 times more, frankly, more than 4 times the cost of brand name drugs compared to most other nations that are about as wealthy or in the same, let's say, tax bracket as the U.S. But that same study also found that we do pay about a third less for generic drugs that we buy, which make up about 90% of all the medicine bought and sold in the U.S. And the reason that we pay more is because of private insurance companies mostly, but I'll talk about that a little later. So Trump is approaching this in the same way that he's approaching all global trade, that there's an imbalance here and we should be getting the lowest price because that's the best quote-unquote deal. Also, for what it's worth, as he was doing this thing, he forgot to sign the executive order. It's not the first time he's done this in both his last term and this term, but he toddled off after the press conference, then had to be told to come back and sign it, which, not a great look for the president. But regardless, as people have been talking about this, the idea of renegotiating drug prices for Americans is frankly pretty popular. People have wanted to do this for a long time on both sides of the aisle. Frankly, though, it's something you hear more from Democrats than Republicans. But there are a few problems with this idea. The first thing is that a presidential administration can't negotiate drug prices on its own as a whole. Trump tried to do this at the very end of his first term in 2020 in the exact same way, by doing this from his office instead of going through Congress, and it was struck down by several different federal judges because the president doesn't have the power to regulate business like this. That's Congress's job. So why would Trump want to do this then if he knows that he got shot down last time? Well, for starters, when Joe Biden was president, he got Congress to pass as part of a massive bill that Medicare's prescription drug plan, called Medicare Part D, can negotiate drug prices. Now, those don't go into effect until 2026. So Trump is setting himself up here to take credit for the possibility of lower prices during an election year in 2026. Second, he likes signing executive orders. They're faster, and it makes it look like he's doing something. Even if nothing gets done at the end, he can still say, well, I signed that piece of paper. And third, he knows this idea is unpopular in Congress. Senate Majority Leader John Thune, a Republican, told the Associated Press that having the idea of negotiating drug prices like this is still, quote, fairly controversial in Congress among Republicans. Now, that is partly because pharmaceutical companies are huge donors to congressional campaigns and political parties on both sides of the aisle, And it's also because right now Republicans are trying to ram through a brand new tax bill while also cutting nearly $1 trillion from Medicaid and Medicare without getting caught. Now, that's something that I have talked about before on the show, and will likely talk about again this week in either a podcast on Thursday or maybe even in the interview on Friday or on the Substack, because it is happening right now. But what it would mean is that Republicans have to cut $880 billion from Medicaid and Medicare, which will mean removing healthcare access for tens of millions of Americans. Most of those people on those plans are children, they are new mothers, and they are old folks. And what it means to remove all of those people from those government plans, which buy about 90% of the pharmaceutical drugs in America right now, it means that the U.S. government likely won't have the same amount of leverage as it does right now when Trump wants to go to force pharma companies to lower their prices. And in speaking of leverage, that's actually the last reason that Trump wants to do this here, because he thinks of it on a global scale. And I don't mean that in like a galaxy brain genius kind of way. I mean, he thinks about an imbalance between other countries and thinks that it's unfair. He thinks that because other countries are paying lower prices for medicine, that the U.S. is being ripped off or the market's being manipulated in some way. Here's how he said it in a press conference.
But it's called most favored nation. We are going to pay the lowest price there is in the world. We will get whoever is paying the lowest price. That's the price that we're going to get. So remember that. So we're no longer paying 10 times more than another country. Whoever is paying the lowest price, we will look at that price and we will say that's the price we're going to pay. Most favored nations. That's what it is.
So this is Trump just really not understanding how the world works. Other countries, like I said, negotiate those prices because they have large government-run healthcare systems. They're not extorting pharma companies. They're the only game in town in those countries. Now, the reason drug prices are higher here in the U.S., like I said before, is because for the most part, our prescription drug prices are negotiated by private insurance companies, not the government. And those companies then work with drug makers to set the prices higher than they would be elsewhere in the world so that everyone along the way gets a cut of those profits, and then we, as the person who needs that medication or that specific drug, gets left holding the bag, and that price is higher. Also, experts across the board don't really think that this is going to lower prices in the U.S. by all that much. We're likely not going to be paying, say, what a country like Sudan or Sierra Leone, a really poor country, is paying for a brand name drug. Drug companies are just going to raise their prices in those poor nations, cutting people off from medication they need. Because let's face it, in those places, we're talking medication like insulin, HIV, and malaria treatment drugs, not Ozempic and Viagra. And so what it's going to mean is that that'll harm the U.S. in the long run when it comes to goodwill and power on the world stage, because those countries will know why this is happening to them. And I can't believe that I'm saying this, but Big Pharma got it right. They've talked about this before when they sued Trump the first time around. Basically, they pointed out that Trump is going down a road here where he harms us on the world stage and essentially ties our pricing to the prices of other countries, and then puts us at the whims of those other countries who would essentially be negotiating our prices for us while negotiating their prices. I know that's a little convoluted, but it's not exactly expert deal making. And there's also no guarantee that at the end of the 30 days, we're going to see anything come out of this, and then what happens next is still really unclear. And speaking of an unclear timeline, let's shift gears and talk about the brand new trade agreement that the Trump administration signed with China this week. So over the weekend, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer met with Chinese officials in famously neutral and rich Switzerland to talk about ending this trade war. On Sunday, and stay with me here, Bessent announced that they had agreed to a future agreeing process to come together so that progress had been made, which is to say, nothing got done. But the White House called it a major trade deal and a victory because the Chinese just came to the table at all. But we didn't get any details at that point in time, and so it didn't really seem like a big deal. And then on Monday, we got some more details, And it turns out the White House, while we did get something, more blinked than anything else when it came to these talks. It's the White House backing down when things got rough. And I say that because Trump still maintains that tariffs are the only way to solve what he sees as problems with how the U.S. trades with other countries. He wants to use tariffs to somehow bring in enough revenue to the government to eliminate the income tax and also force companies to bring jobs back to the U.S. and to build new factories here or have their offices here. And what he means by bringing in revenue is that, yes, when goods come in from another country that has a high tariff or a tariff in general on them, the company importing those goods or whatever they are has to pay that tariff to the U.S. government. And then that fills the U.S. government coffers. It helps buoy a budget if there's enough of it. But those costs that the companies have to pay are then put onto the U.S. consumer. So really, even if we could get rid of the income tax in general, things would be more expensive and it would come out in the wash. And by all accounts, we really couldn't raise enough revenue to do away with income taxes right now. But even if all of that ended up being true, why would Trump let his top negotiators give up on the tariffs then? It doesn't make any sense. And that's how experts on China are seeing this too. One of them telling the New York Times this week, the Geneva Agreement represents an almost complete U.S. retreat that vindicates Chinese President Xi Jinping's decision to forcefully retaliate on U.S. tariffs. China is also calling this a victory for them, seeing it as their government calling Trump's bluff on tariffs after U.S. companies like Mattel and Ford had been warning about the high cost of tariffs, and major shipping ports like the Port of LA and the Port of Long Beach, which is regularly the busiest shipping port in the country, had been described in this past week as becoming ghost towns. And they also warned about massive job layoffs from those dock workers during a part of the year when companies are trying to get materials to the U.S. for the stuff that they make and sell so that they can be ready for the holiday season. Now, this agreement with China isn't all bad. Regardless of the flip-flop for the White House, it does turn the temperature way down on this trade war. Both China and the U.S. agreed to talk more about the flow of fentanyl and the chemicals used to make it coming into the U.S., mostly through the mail, weirdly enough. And in the past, China has accused the U.S. of the talking about drug trafficking as an excuse to hit China with tariffs. Now, the U.S. does that kind of thing all the time. Think economic sanctions on countries like Russia or Iran or North Korea. So for the Chinese to say, yeah, we'll talk about that if you lower the tariffs, is a good thing and a common way we negotiate. They also, China and the U.S., plan on working to try and fix some of the problems with the supply chains between our two countries because they were pretty damaged during the pandemic and still aren't back to normal. Now, the last bit of good news from this is that Treasury Secretary Bessent said that neither side wants to see what they're calling a decoupling. And that means we would totally cut ties with China when it comes to trade. And frankly, that's kind of all we have with them. And I'm not even sure that could happen in the first place, given how tangled together our countries are when it comes to trade and manufacturing and business. But it's good to know that neither side is serious about cutting ties, even if Trump has threatened to do that. But in the end, we don't really know what the U.S. wants in return. Yes, Trump says he wants balanced trade, meaning we import the same as we export to China. But that's just not how our economies work. And it's not even clear that the U.S. would have the capacity to do that kind of thing. We don't have the factories to do it here. We don't have the raw materials to do it in the U.S. most of the time. Like literally in some cases, we don't have the right kind of earth beneath our feet or the right kind of trees in our forests so that U.S. companies would even have the right raw materials to make what they make or do what they do. And the same thing goes for China in a lot of ways. Making up for those things is kind of the entire point of global trade. And while that's the really big scale of this, I think the question we're all asking is, what does this mean for us as we go to buy things over the next 90 days? Well, economists agree that lowering the Chinese tariffs will help stabilize some of the global shipping trade over the next few months. Though many predict there will still be lower imports, which means higher prices, which means we'll still be paying more, and that means we could see fewer things on shelves, or stores could run out of things sooner or faster. though again maybe slower than they would have been before this 90-day pause. Ultimately, economists say, in the end, tariffs are an added tax on the things that we buy no matter what, and they're still the cornerstone of what the Trump administration wants to do with our economy. So we can expect to see prices go up, and there will be a lot of ups and downs over the summer. Because remember, China, while it's the biggest player in trade for the U.S., is only one of 90 different trade deals the White House has to get done. So we are a long way from being out of the woods on this. Okay, that is it for today's episode. Please rate and review the show on whatever podcast app you listen to this on. Like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications on YouTube so you don't miss out on any new videos there. Subscribe to the Make It Make Sense Substack. It's just $5 a month. I've got brand new content and new articles going up all the time, including one that I just put up today. If you don't want to sign up, no sweat, but please share the show on social media. It's MIMS Newspod. It's MIMS Newspod, all one word on every platform. I am at Grant Herms on X and Bluesky, and at Grant Herms TV on everything else. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm Grant Herms, and I'll talk to you on Thursday.